The thunder of hooves shook the earth beneath Hannah Rose's feet, vibrating through her bones like a terrible premonition. One moment she'd been gathering wildflowers in the meadow outside Challies, Idaho. The next she was facing down a wall of terrified cattle, bearing down on her with the unstoppable force of a runaway locomotive. It was the spring of 1878, and Hannah had come west with dreams that now seemed about to end in a trampling death. Time slowed as her legs froze, her lungs seized, and the distance between her and the stampeding herd vanished with each passing heartbeat. The golden afternoon sun caught the dust rising from hundreds of pounding hooves, creating a halo of light around the instruments of her doom. "Move, damn it!" A voice roared from her right, cutting through her paralysis. Hannah's head snapped toward the sound as a horse and rider materialized from the swirling dust, racing parallel to the stampede. The cowboy was bent low over his mount's neck, his hat pulled tight against the wind, one hand extended toward her. "Take my hand," he shouted, guiding his horse dangerously close to the edge of the thundering herd. Hannah lurched forward, her body finally responding to the terror flooding her veins. The cowboy swerved closer, his horse dancing nervously at the proximity to the stampede. Their fingertips brushed once, twice, and on the third desperate grab, his hand closed around her wrist like an iron manacle. With strength that seemed impossible, he swung her up behind him in one fluid motion. Hannah crashed against his back, arms instinctively circling his waist as the horse beneath them surged forward, racing to outrun the stampede. "Hold tight," he called over his shoulder, and Hannah buried her face between his shoulder blades, the leather of his vest cool against her flushed cheek. They rode hard, the cowboy expertly guiding his mount away from the danger, putting distance between themselves and the thundering cattle. Hannah clung to him, her heart hammering against his back, her thoughts a jumbled mess of terror and relief. When they finally slowed, Hannah realized they'd traveled a fair distance from where he'd rescued her. The rolling hills around Challies spread out beneath an endless blue sky, the town itself visible as a small collection of buildings in the valley below. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted and tossed his head as the cowboy brought him to a stop on a small rise. Only then did Hannah loosen her death grip on her rescuer's waist and slide awkwardly to the ground, her legs trembling beneath her. "Thank you," she managed, looking up at the man who'd saved her life. I don't know what happened. I couldn't move." The cowboy dismounted with easy grace, his boots hitting the ground with barely a sound. He was tall, lean but solid, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work. When he removed his hat, Hannah found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm set in a sun-bronzed face. "Lucas Zephyr," he said simply, extending a calloused hand. "Most folks call me Luke." "Hannah Rose," she replied, placing her much smaller hand in his. "I'm still new to these parts." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I gathered that. Folks from around here know better than to wander the open range during a drive." Heat rose to Hannah's cheeks. "I was gathering flowers. I didn't realize." Her voice trailed off as embarrassment washed over her. Lucas nodded, his expression softening. "No harm done now. Those were Hollister's cattle. Something must have spooked them." "I am in your debt, Mr. Zephyr," Hannah said earnestly. Suddenly very aware of the state of her appearance, her dress was dusty. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and she'd lost her bonnet somewhere in the chaos. "Luke," he corrected, then looked toward the distant herd which had slowed to a stop about a half-mile away. "Those boys will have their hands full gathering strays for days." He turned his attention back to her. "Where were you heading before all this excitement? I'll see you safely there." I'm staying with my aunt, Martha Winthrop. She has a small place just outside of town. Recognition flashed across Lucas's face. The school teacher's sister. I heard she had family coming. Hannah nodded. I arrived last week from Boston. Lucas's lips quirked in what might have been amusement. Boston to Challies is quite a change, Miss Rose. Hannah, please, she said, then sighed. And yes, it is. My father passed last winter, and Aunt Martha is my only family now. Something in Lucas's expression shifted, a momentary softening that revealed compassion beneath his weathered exterior. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple but genuine. Thank you, Hannah replied, touched by his sincerity. Lucas replaced his hat, the brim casting a shadow over his eyes. We should get you back before your aunt starts to worry. He moved to his horse and adjusted the saddle. Can you ride? Or would you prefer I take you up with me again? Hannah hesitated, weighing her limited riding experience against the impropriety of sharing a saddle with a man she'd just met. But the memory of those thundering hooves was still too fresh, the trembling in her limbs still too pronounced. If it wouldn't be too much trouble, I think I'd prefer not to ride alone just yet, she admitted. Lucas nodded, seeming to understand the fear she wasn't explicitly voicing. With a graceful movement that belied his size, he mounted the stallion and extended his hand down to her. Come on then. Samson here's strong enough for two. Hannah took his hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him. As they set off toward town at an easy trot, she was acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the unfamiliar intimacy of her arms around a stranger's waist. In Boston, such contact would have been scandalous, but here in this wild country, the normal rules seemed suspended in the face of life and death. How long have you been in Idaho territory? Hannah asked, trying to distract herself from both the lingering fear and the strange comfort she found in holding on to this man. Born and raised not far from here, Lucas answered, his voice carrying easily on the wind. My pa came west during the gold rush days, met my ma who was half Shoshone. They had a small spread over in the next valley, but it's mine now. You're a rancher then? Hannah asked, noting how the land around them was greener than she'd expected the West to be. In a manner of speaking, Lucas replied. I run cattle, but not as many as some. I also break horses for the larger outfits, and I guide hunting parties when the season's right. A man needs more than one skill to make it out here. As they rode, Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local knowledge, which peaks belonged to which mountain range, which creek fed into the Salmon River, where the best fishing spots were hidden. Hannah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of his voice and the horse's steady gait, the terror of the stampede gradually receding. They crested a small hill, and Lucas reined Samson to a stop. Below them, Challies spread out in the valley, a modest collection of wooden buildings along a main street, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding countryside. Beyond the town, the Salmon River wound like a silver ribbon through the landscape, and in the distance, snow-capped mountains reached toward the sky. It's beautiful, Hannah breathed, seeing the rugged landscape through new eyes. That it is, Lucas agreed quietly, and something in his tone made Hannah wonder if he was looking at more than just the view. They continued down the hill, and Lucas guided Samson along a well-worn trail that led toward a small cabin set apart from the main cluster of the town. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and a tidy garden surrounded by a white picket fence adorned the front yard. Aunt Martha's, Hannah confirmed, recognizing the homestead where she'd been staying. As they approached, the door to the cabin opened, and Martha Winthrop emerged, her expression shifting from curiosity to relief when she recognized her niece. Hannah, I was beginning to worry, the older woman called, hurrying down the short path to the gate. Her eyes widened at the sight of Hannah sharing a horse with a man, but she quickly composed herself. Lucas brought Samson to a gentle stop and dismounted before helping Hannah down. Her legs felt strangely unsteady as they touched the ground, though whether from the ride or the lingering effects of her near-death experience, she couldn't say. "Mr. Zephyr," Martha acknowledged with a nod. "I see you've met my niece." "Under rather dramatic circumstances, madam," Lucas replied, removing his hat in respect. "Miss Rose here had a close call with the Hollister herd." Martha's hand flew to her throat. "Goodness, are you hurt, child?" "I'm fine, Aunt Martha," Hannah assured her, though she knew she must look a fright. "Thanks entirely to Mr. Zephyr's intervention. Lucas saved me from being trampled. I froze when I saw the cattle coming, and he rode in and pulled me up behind his saddle just in time." Martha's expression softened as she looked at the cowboy. "Then it seems we owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Zephyr." Lucas shook his head. "No debt, Mrs. Winthrop. Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps, but not everyone would have succeeded," Martha said firmly. "You must stay for supper at the very least." Lucas hesitated, his eyes briefly meeting Hannah's before returning to her aunt. "That's kind of you, madam, but I should be getting back. I've got stock to tend to before dark." "Another time, then," Martha insisted. "Sunday after church, perhaps." A small smile touched Lucas's lips. "I'd be honored, madam." He turned to Hannah then, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "Miss Rose, I'm glad you're safe. Do be more careful about where you go wandering in the future." There was no scolding in his tone, only genuine concern that warmed Hannah from within. "I will, Mr. Zephyr, and thank you again. I quite literally owe you my life." He nodded once, replaced his hat, and mounted Samson with fluid grace. "Until Sunday, then." Hannah and Martha watched as he rode away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. "Well," Martha said, a hint of amusement in her voice as she ushered Hannah toward the cabin, "it seems you've had quite an adventurous afternoon. Come inside and tell me everything while you clean up for supper." As Hannah followed her aunt into the cabin, she couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder. Lucas Zephyr had already disappeared over the rise, but the impression of his storm-gray eyes and the memory of his strong arms lifting her to safety lingered. For the first time since arriving in Idaho territory, Hannah felt something other than grief and displacement. She felt alive truly, vibrantly alive in a way she hadn't since before her father's illness. And as she stepped through the doorway into her aunt's home, she wondered what Sunday might bring. The following morning, Hannah awoke with muscles she didn't know she possessed aching from yesterday's ordeal. She moved slowly as she helped her aunt prepare breakfast, wincing as she reached for the plates on the high shelf. "You're moving like an old woman," Martha observed, her keen eyes missing nothing. "Are you certain you weren't injured yesterday?" Hannah shook her head. "Not injured, just sore. I've never ridden like that before." Martha's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "I imagine not." Boston society hardly prepares a young woman for clinging to the back of a cowboy during a stampede. Despite her discomfort, Hannah laughed. "No, that particular scenario was never covered in my finishing school lessons." As they sat down to eat, Martha regarded her niece thoughtfully over her coffee cup. "Lucas Zephyr is well respected in these parts. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's known to be fair and hardworking. His mother was Shoshone royalty, in a manner of speaking daughter of a chief. His father was a Pennsylvanian who came west with dreams of gold and found love instead." Hannah absorbed this information, curious about the man who'd saved her. "Are they still living?" Martha shook her head. "Both passed some years ago. Influenza took his mother, and his father's heart gave out the following winter, some say from grief." She took a thoughtful sip of coffee. Lucas was barely 20 when he inherited the ranch. He's done well with it, considering. Considering, Hannah prompted. Mixed-blood men face challenges in this territory not fully accepted by either world, but Lucas has earned respect through his own merit. Martha set her cup down decisively. Now, what are your plans for today? Nothing too adventurous, I hope. Hannah smiled ruefully. I think I've had enough adventure for a while. I thought I might help you with the mending and perhaps write some letters this afternoon. Martha nodded approvingly. A sensible plan. The day passed quietly, and by evening, Hannah found her thoughts returning again and again to her rescuer. There was something compelling about Lucas Zephyr, beyond his timely heroism, a quiet intensity and self-possession that intrigued her. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Hannah took special care with her appearance, selecting her best church dress of pale blue cotton and arranging her chestnut hair in a simple but flattering style. She told herself it was merely proper respect for the house of God, but the flutter in her stomach when she thought of seeing Lucas again suggested otherwise. The small white church in Challies served as the heart of community gatherings. As Hannah and Martha approached, Hannah was struck by the diversity of the congregants. Weather-beaten ranchers in their Sunday best stood alongside shopkeepers and their families, miners fresh from the hills, and even a few Native American faces at the back of the crowd. The service was simpler than what Hannah was accustomed to in Boston, but no less fervent. The traveling preacher spoke of resilience and faith with a passion that resonated in this harsh land, where survival often depended on both. Hannah found herself scanning the assembled worshippers, looking for a particular tall figure, but was disappointed. Lucas wasn't among the congregation. As people filed out after the service, exchanging greetings and news, Martha was drawn into conversation with several other women. Hannah stood slightly apart, nodding politely at introductions but feeling the newcomer's awkwardness acutely. "He's not much for organized religion," a voice said quietly beside her, and Hannah turned to find an older man with a silver-streaked beard and kind eyes observing her. "Lucas, I mean. Since you've been looking for him." Heat rose to Hannah's cheeks at being so transparent. "I wasn't, that is," the man chuckled. "No need for embarrassment, miss. News travels fast in a small town. I'm Henry Wilson, the blacksmith, and you're Martha's niece from back east." Hannah rose, she confirmed, extending her hand. "How did you know I was looking for Mr. Zephyr?" "Because every female under 60 has been looking for Luke since he rode into town 5 years ago," Henry replied with a twinkle in his eye. "But mostly because the story of your rescue is all anyone's been talking about these past 2 days, and I noticed you scanning the crowd like you were taking inventory." Hannah couldn't help but laugh at his candor. "Is Mr. Zephyr aware of his popularity among the ladies of Challies?" "Oh, he's aware. That's partly why he keeps to himself, that and—" Henry trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. "Well, it's not my story to tell, but if you're expecting him for Sunday dinner, he'll be there. Luke Zephyr is a man of his word." Before Hannah could inquire further, Martha rejoined them, greeting the blacksmith warmly. "Henry, I see you've met my niece." "Indeed I have, Martha. Fine young lady you've got here. Brave, too, from what I hear." "More foolish than brave," Hannah corrected. "But I've learned my lesson about wandering too far alone." "Good," Henry nodded. "This country has beauty and bounty to spare, but it demands respect." After a few more exchanges, Henry took his leave, and Martha and Hannah began the walk back to the cabin. The spring day had warmed considerably, and Hannah found herself looking forward to the shade of her aunt's porch and a cool glass of lemonade. "Henry seems kind," Hannah observed as they walked. "He is," Martha agreed. "One of the first settlers here." "His wife," God rest her soul, taught me everything I know about gardening in this climate. They rounded the bend in the road, and Martha's cabin came into view along with a familiar chestnut stallion tied to the hitching post. Hannah's pulse quickened as she spotted Lucas Zephyr sitting on the porch steps, hat in hand, looking freshly scrubbed and somewhat ill at ease in clean clothes that, while simple, were clearly his best. He rose as they approached, and Hannah was struck again by his height and the quiet dignity in his bearing. "Mrs. Winthrop, Miss Rose," he greeted them, inclining his head respectfully. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all, Mr. Zephyr," Martha replied warmly. "We're pleased you could join us. I assume church services aren't to your taste." A flicker of something discomfort perhaps crossed his features. "I find my own ways to observe the Sabbath, madam." Martha nodded, accepting his answer without judgment. "Well, you're here now, and we're glad of it. Come inside while I get dinner started. Hannah can entertain you." Hannah shot her aunt a look that was part gratitude, part mortification at her directness, but Martha merely smiled innocently as she ushered them both inside. The cabin was modest but comfortable, with polished wooden floors covered by braided rugs, simple furniture that showed signs of skilled craftsmanship, and windows that let in plenty of light. Bookshelves lined one wall, evidence of Martha's scholarly interests, and dried herbs hung from the kitchen rafters, filling the air with a pleasant, earthy scent. "Please sit." Hannah gestured to the small sofa as Martha disappeared into the kitchen. "Can I offer you some lemonade?" "It's freshly made." "That would be welcome, thank you," Lucas replied, settling onto the sofa with the careful movements of a man unused to indoor furnishings. Hannah poured lemonade for them both, using her aunt's good glasses, a small detail she hoped he wouldn't notice but would appreciate nonetheless. When she handed him the drink, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected spark of awareness through her. "Thank you," he said, his voice lower than before, and Hannah wondered if he'd felt it too. "How are your cattle faring after the excitement?" she asked, taking a seat in the armchair across from him. "Those weren't my cattle," Lucas clarified. "The Hollister herd is considerably larger than mine. But I spoke with Tom Hollister yesterday, and they've rounded up most of the strays. No significant losses." "That's good to hear," Hannah said, relieved that her inadvertent presence hadn't caused lasting problems. "I still feel terrible about wandering into their path." Lucas studied her over the rim of his glass. "You couldn't have known, but you do seem to be taking to the west fairly well, considering I nearly got myself killed my first week here." Hannah asked with a self-deprecating smile, the corner of his mouth lifted. "Considering you're from Boston society, and this is about as far from that as you can get without leaving the country entirely." Hannah considered this. "It is different, wildly different, but there's something honest about this place. The land doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure." Something in Lucas's expression shifted, a kind of recognition. "That's well put, Miss Rose." "Hannah," she reminded him. "Hannah," he echoed, and her name in his deep voice sounded different somehow, more significant. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken awareness. Hannah found herself noticing details about him she'd been too frightened to observe during their first meeting: the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the calloused hands that handled the delicate glass with surprising gentleness. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, genuinely curious. Lucas's expression warmed as he spoke of his land, the valley with its year-round creek, the meadows where his cattle grazed, the small but sturdy cabin his father had built and that he had expanded over the years. He spoke with quiet pride of his horses, especially his prized stallion Samson, and of the hunting and fishing that supplemented his income from ranching. Hannah listened, entranced not just by the content but by the transformation in Lucas as he spoke of things he clearly loved. The reserved man revealed glimpses of passion and deep connection to the land that fascinated her. Their conversation flowed easily, moving from his ranch to her life in Boston, her father's work as a professor of literature, and her own love of books. Lucas surprised her with his knowledge of classic literature, explaining that his mother had insisted on his education despite their remote location. She believed knowledge was power, he said simply. She taught me to read in English and Shoshone both, made sure I knew the stories of both my bloodlines. She sounds remarkable, Hannah said softly. She was, Lucas agreed, a shadow of old grief passing briefly across his features. Your father sounds like he was a good man as well. Hannah nodded, her own loss still fresh enough to sting. The best. He encouraged my mind when many men of his station would have focused solely on making me marriageable. He believed women deserved education just as much as men. A progressive thinker, Lucas observed. I imagine he'd be proud of your courage in coming west after his passing. I'd like to think so, Hannah said, though I suspect he'd have had something to say about my nearly getting trampled my first week here. Lucas's chuckle was a warm, rich sound that Hannah immediately wanted to hear again. Before she could think of something else to say, Martha called from the kitchen that dinner was ready. The meal was simple but delicious: roasted chicken, fresh bread, spring vegetables from Martha's garden, and berry pie for dessert. The conversation remained easy throughout, with Martha sharing local stories, and Lucas occasionally adding details or corrections from his perspective. Hannah found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice the way he ate with neat efficiency. The respectful attention he paid to Martha's stories, the quiet intelligence behind his occasional comments. There was a gravity to Lucas Zephyr that suggested depths beyond the taciturn cowboy exterior. After dinner, Martha insisted on clearing up alone, practically shooing Hannah and Lucas onto the porch with coffee. The spring evening was mild, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley and painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee and watching the day fade into twilight. "Thank you for coming today," Hannah said finally. "I know you must be busy with your ranch." Lucas nodded. "Sundays are quieter, and good company is worth making time for." The simple compliment warmed Hannah more than it should have. "I've enjoyed hearing about your life here. It's so different from anything I've known." "And yet you seem to be adapting well," Lucas observed. "Some people from the East never do. They try to force the land to conform to their expectations instead of learning its ways." Hannah considered this. "I suppose I've had practice at adapting. After my mother died when I was 12, life changed dramatically. Father and I had to create a new normal, and then after he passed." She trailed off, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Coming here felt right somehow, a fresh start in a place where I could build something new." Lucas was quiet for a moment before asking, "What do you hope to build?" Hannah rose. It was a profound question, one that made Hannah pause. "I'm not entirely sure yet," she admitted. In Boston, the path was clear: marriage to someone suitable, a comfortable home, children, social obligations. Here, everything feels possible. Different possibilities, perhaps, but wider somehow. Lucas nodded as if he understood perfectly. "The territory has a way of stripping things down to what matters. No room for pretense when survival takes precedence." "Is that why you stay?" Hannah asked. "Because it's honest." Lucas considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "Partly. It's also the only home I've ever known. My father's people and my mother's people are both buried in this soil. Their blood runs in the creeks each spring. He looked at her directly then. And yes, there's a freedom here for someone like me that doesn't exist in more civilized places. The way he said civilized carried a weight of understanding that made Hannah think of Henry Wilson's unfinished comment at church. She wanted to ask more, but sensed this wasn't the moment to press. Instead, she said, "I'd like to see your ranch sometime, if that wouldn't be improper." Lucas's expression softened. "I'd like that. Perhaps you and your aunt could ride out some Sunday afternoon. I could show you the valley. It's at its best this time of year with the wildflowers coming in." "I'd enjoy that," Hannah said, pleased at the prospect of spending more time with this intriguing man. "Though I should warn you, my riding skills are rudimentary at best." "We could fix that," Lucas offered. "If you're interested in learning, I mean. Proper riding is essential out here, and I've got a gentle mare that would suit a beginner." The idea of Lucas teaching her to ride sent a thrill of anticipation through Hannah. "I would be very interested. Aunt Martha has been saying I should learn anyway, for practical reasons." "Your aunt is a wise woman," Lucas said with a hint of a smile. "Practical indeed in this country." The porch door opened and Martha emerged with more coffee. "It's getting chilly out here. Are you two planning to catch your deaths?" Hannah hadn't even noticed the dropping temperature, so engrossed had she been in their conversation. "We were just discussing riding lessons, Aunt Martha. Mr. Zephyr has offered to teach me." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained neutral. "A useful skill, to be sure. And Mr. Zephyr is known for his way with horses." She refilled their cups and settled into the third chair. "Now, tell me about this mare you have in mind for my niece. She's not some half-wild Mustang, I hope." As Lucas described the gentle mare named Daisy, Hannah found herself imagining future afternoons spent learning to ride, exploring the countryside with this man beside her, perhaps even visiting his ranch in the valley he spoke of with such quiet pride. The evening deepened into night, stars appearing in the vast Idaho sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Conversation flowed easily among the three of them, and Hannah felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that had eluded her since her father's death. When at last Lucas rose to take his leave, Hannah felt a pang of disappointment that the evening was ending. He shook Martha's hand warmly and thanked her for the meal, then turned to Hannah. "Would Wednesday afternoon suit for your first lesson? I could bring Daisy here around 2 o'clock if that's convenient." "Wednesday would be perfect," Hannah replied, perhaps too quickly, but she couldn't bring herself to care about appearing eager. Lucas nodded, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Until Wednesday, then." Hannah and Martha stood on the porch, watching as he mounted Samson with effortless grace and tipped his hat to them before riding away into the night. "Well," Martha said as they went back inside, "Lucas Zephyr is certainly more talkative in your company than I've ever seen him." Hannah busied herself collecting the coffee cups to hide the blush she could feel rising to her cheeks. "He's interesting. Different from the men I knew in Boston." "Different indeed," Martha agreed, her tone neutral but her eyes knowing. "Just remember, Hannah, that the territory has its own rules and prejudices. Not everyone sees Lucas as I do as a good man, regardless of his heritage." Hannah set the cups down with more force than necessary. "Anyone who would judge him for his bloodline is a fool." Martha's expression softened. "I agree, but fools can be dangerous when they band together." She patted Hannah's hand. "I'm not warning you away, dear, just advising caution and awareness." Hannah nodded, appreciating her aunt's frankness. "I understand, and I'm not rushing into anything. We've barely met." "Yet you've already entrusted him with your life once," Martha observed shrewdly. "Some would say that's more significant than years of drawing-room conversations." Hannah couldn't argue with that logic. The connection she felt with Lucas Zephyr defied rational explanation. It was as if the moment he'd pulled her from the path of the Stampede, something fundamental had shifted in her world. That night, as Hannah prepared for bed, she found herself drawn to the window. The moon hung low over the mountains, casting silver light across the landscape. Somewhere out there, Lucas was riding home to his ranch in the valley, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him. For the first time since arriving in Idaho territory, Hannah felt truly glad she had come west. Whatever lay ahead, riding lessons, friendship, or something more, she faced it not with trepidation but with anticipation. The West was reshaping her already, teaching her to embrace the unexpected and find courage she hadn't known she possessed. She thought of Lucas's question on the porch. "What do you hope to build?" Hannah rose. She didn't have a complete answer yet, but she was beginning to glimpse possibilities that excited her, a life with meaning and purpose, perhaps even love in this wild and beautiful place. Wednesday couldn't come quickly enough. The appointed day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for Hannah's first riding lesson. She dressed practically in her sturdiest skirt and boots, with her hair braided and pinned securely to her head. Martha watched her preparations with barely concealed amusement. "One might think you were preparing for a social call rather than a riding lesson," she observed as Hannah checked her appearance one last time. "I simply want to look presentable," Hannah defended, though she knew her aunt had seen through her. Was all Martha said, but her eyes twinkled knowingly. The hours crawled by until finally, at a few minutes before 2, the sound of hoofbeats announced Lucas's arrival. Hannah forced herself to wait a respectable moment before going to the door, not wanting to appear overeager. When she stepped onto the porch, the sight before her made her smile. Lucas was dismounting from Samson, while beside him stood a dappled gray mare with gentle eyes and a patient demeanor. Lucas himself was dressed in his working clothes, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his ever-present hat. He looked more at ease than he had in his Sunday best, more himself somehow. "Good afternoon," Hannah called, descending the porch steps. Lucas turned, and the smile that lit his features sent a flutter through her chest. "Afternoon, Hannah. Ready for your first lesson?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, approaching the mare cautiously. "This must be Daisy." "She is," Lucas confirmed, stroking the horse's neck affectionately. "Steadiest horse I've ever trained. She'll take good care of you." Hannah reached out slowly, letting Daisy sniff her hand before gently patting her soft nose. The horse nickered softly, seeming to approve of her. "She's beautiful," Hannah said, genuinely impressed by the mare's gentle bearing and intelligent eyes. "She comes from good stock," Lucas said with evident pride. "Her dam was my mother's favorite horse." He stepped closer, adjusting the saddle. "This is a woman's saddle borrowed from the Wilson's daughter. It'll be easier for you to learn on than riding aside." Hannah nodded, grateful for his thoughtfulness. "Where do we begin?" "With the basics," Lucas replied. "First, you need to get comfortable around horses, their movements, their moods. Then we'll work on mounting, proper posture, and basic commands." What followed was the most thorough introduction to horsemanship Hannah could have imagined. Lucas was a patient but exacting teacher, demonstrating each skill before having her try it herself. He explained the importance of a horse's body language, how to approach safely, how to check the saddle and bridle, and finally, how to mount properly. When it came time for Hannah to actually get onto Daisy's back, Lucas positioned himself close beside her. "Left foot in the stirrup, grip the saddle horn and push up with your right leg," he instructed. "I'll steady you." Hannah attempted to follow his instructions, but her first try was awkward, leaving her half on, half off the saddle. Lucas's strong hands caught her waist, steadying her before she could fall. "Almost," he encouraged. "Try again, but this time commit to the movement. Don't hesitate halfway through." The feel of his hands at her waist lingered as Hannah repositioned herself. Taking a deep breath, she pushed off more decisively this time and swung her leg over, finding herself properly seated in the saddle. "Well done," Lucas said, his approval warming her more than it should have. "It feels higher than I expected," Hannah admitted, gripping the saddle horn tightly as Daisy shifted beneath her. "You'll get used to it," Lucas assured her, adjusting her stirrups to the proper length. "Now, sit up straight, shoulders back. Your posture affects how Daisy responds to you." For the next hour, they worked in the flat area in front of Martha's cabin. Lucas led Daisy in a gentle circle, as Hannah learned to move with the horse's gait, to hold the reins properly, and to use subtle shifts in weight and pressure to communicate her intentions. Martha emerged at one point with lemonade, watching their progress with evident approval before returning inside to give them privacy. By the end of the lesson, Hannah had progressed to guiding Daisy in simple patterns without Lucas leading the mare. Her confidence grew with each successful turn, each responsive movement from the patient horse beneath her. "You're a natural," Lucas commented as he helped her dismount. His hands encircled her waist, lifting her down with ease, and for a brief moment they stood very close, his hands still at her waist, her palms resting lightly on his shoulders. Time seemed to suspend itself as their eyes met. Hannah was acutely aware of his nearness, the strength in his hands, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Lucas stepped back first, releasing her with a slight clearing of his throat. "You did well today, better than most beginners." "Thank you," Hannah said, hoping her voice didn't betray the fluttering in her chest. "I had an excellent teacher." He ducked his head slightly at the compliment, a gesture Hannah was coming to recognize as characteristic when he felt awkward about praise. "Same time Friday, if that suits." "Friday would be perfect," Hannah confirmed, "though I suspect I'll be feeling today's lesson in my muscles tomorrow." A smile tugged at Lucas's mouth. "Likely so. A warm bath with Epsom salts will help if you have any." "I'll remember that," Hannah promised. She stroked Daisy's nose one last time. "Thank you for being so patient with me, sweet girl." Lucas watched her with the horse, something soft in his expression. "She likes you. Horses are good judges of character." "Are they?" Hannah asked, pleased by the implied compliment. "The best," Lucas confirmed. He hesitated, then added, "There's a gathering at the Wilsons' place Saturday evening. Nothing formal, just neighbors sharing food and maybe some music. Your aunt usually attends, I thought. Perhaps you might like to come as well." The invitation, offered with such careful casualness, made Hannah's heart leap. "I'd enjoy that very much." Lucas nodded, his eyes warming. "Good. I'll see you Friday then for your next lesson." As he mounted Samson and led Daisy away, Hannah remained by the gate, watching until they disappeared around the bend in the road. Only then did she allow the wide smile she'd been suppressing to spread across her face. Inside, Martha was waiting with a knowing look. "Successful lesson?" "Very," Hannah replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "And there's a gathering at the Wilsons on Saturday that Lucas mentioned. Do you usually attend?" "I do," Martha confirmed. "It's a pleasant tradition. Everyone brings food to share. Henry plays the fiddle, and we all pretend we don't notice which young folks slip outside to walk in the moonlight." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks at her aunt's implication. "It sounds lovely." Martha hummed non-committally. "I notice Lucas is Lucas now, not Mr. Zephyr." "He asked me to use his given name," Hannah said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'm sure he did," Martha replied with a smile. Well, we should plan what dish to bring on Saturday, and perhaps press your blue dress it brings out your eyes. Hannah didn't even try to pretend she wasn't pleased by the suggestion. I think that's an excellent idea. The following days passed in a pleasant rhythm. Hannah's second riding lesson on Friday showed marked improvement, with Lucas teaching her to trot and to guide Daisy through more complex patterns. Their conversation flowed easily as they worked, moving from practical instruction to more personal exchanges. Hannah learned about Lucas's herd of cattle smaller than the big ranchers, but carefully bred for quality over quantity. He spoke of his plans to expand his horse breeding operation, his reputation for training already bringing customers from as far as Boise. In turn, Hannah shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's academic colleagues, the constraints of society, her secret dream of writing stories someday. "What kind of stories?" Lucas asked as they walked the horses back to the cabin after the lesson. Hannah hesitated, unused to anyone taking this particular ambition seriously. "Adventure stories, I think, about brave women finding their way in difficult circumstances." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Seems to me you're living that kind of story now." The simple observation, offered without judgment or condescension, touched Hannah deeply. "Perhaps I am, though I haven't been very brave thus far, just foolish enough to nearly get trampled." "Surviving in the West at all takes courage," Lucas countered, "especially coming from where you did. And you didn't panic when faced with the stampede. You froze, yes, but many would have screamed or run the wrong way. You kept your wits." Hannah hadn't considered it that way before. "That's generous of you to say." "It's the truth," Lucas said simply. "And now you're learning to ride, adapting to a completely different way of life. There's courage in that." His faith in her bolstered Hannah's confidence, not just about riding but about her decision to come west. By the time Saturday evening arrived, she found herself genuinely excited for the gathering, not solely because of Lucas's presence, though that was certainly a significant factor, but also because she felt ready to engage more fully with the community of Challies. Martha and Hannah arrived at the Wilsons' homestead just as the sun was beginning its descent. The house was larger than Martha's cabin, with a spacious yard where tables had been set up for food and benches arranged for seating. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to be lit when darkness fell, and a cleared area seemed designated for dancing. Several families were already present, with children playing a spirited game of tag while adults arranged dishes and greeted one another. Martha's berry cobbler and Hannah's fresh bread were warmly received and added to the growing feast. Henry Wilson approached them, fiddle in hand, his face creased in a welcoming smile. "Martha, Hannah, glad you could make it. Quite a turnout tonight." Martha looked around appreciatively. "Indeed. The whole valley seems to be here." "Almost," Henry agreed, his eyes twinkling at Hannah. "Some folks are still arriving." Hannah tried not to be too obvious about scanning the gathering for a particular tall figure, but Henry's knowing chuckle suggested she wasn't succeeding. "He'll be here," the blacksmith assured her quietly. "Luke never misses these gatherings, though he tends to arrive fashionably late." As if summoned by Henry's words, a rider appeared on the road, Lucas astride Samson, silhouetted against the sunset. Hannah's heart quickened at the sight of him, and she busied herself arranging her bread on a serving platter to hide her reaction. Lucas dismounted and secured Samson with the other horses before making his way toward the gathering. He dressed with care. Hannah noted clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He'd even polished his boots. He greeted several people as he made his way through the crowd, but his eyes sought and found Hannah almost immediately. The smile that touched his lips when he spotted her sent warmth flooding through her. "Evening, Mrs. Winthrop, Hannah," he said as he reached them, removing his hat. "You both look lovely tonight." Martha accepted the compliment graciously, then excused herself to help Mrs. Wilson with the lemonade, leaving Hannah and Lucas standing somewhat awkwardly together. "You came," Lucas said, as if he'd harbored some doubt. "Of course," Hannah replied. "I've been looking forward to it." The admission felt bold, but the pleased look that crossed his face made her glad she'd spoken honestly. "As have I," he said simply. Before either could say more, Henry called for everyone's attention, announcing that supper was ready. The gathering formed a line at the tables laden with food: fried chicken, ham, various salads and vegetables, fresh bread, and an array of pies and cakes for dessert. Lucas stayed beside Hannah as they filled their plates and found seats on one of the benches. The easy conversation they'd developed during her riding lessons continued as they ate, interspersed with introductions as various community members stopped by to meet Martha's niece from Boston. Hannah observed the interactions carefully, noting how people treated Lucas. Most were friendly and respectful, particularly the older settlers like Henry and his contemporaries. A few of the younger men seemed more reserved, watching Lucas with expressions that ranged from cautious respect to barely concealed resentment. "Tom Hollister's boys," Lucas explained quietly when he noticed her observation. "The youngest one fancies himself sweet on Eliza Wilson. He doesn't much appreciate her preference for my company at these gatherings." Hannah glanced toward a pretty blonde girl who was indeed watching Lucas with obvious interest. A surprising twinge of jealousy caught her off guard. "I see," she said, striving for a neutral tone. "And do you return her preference?" Lucas's eyes returned to Hannah, steady and direct. "I've never given Eliza Willow reason to think so. Henry's a good friend and his daughter is a nice enough girl, but—" He hesitated, then finished simply, "No, I don't return her preference." The relief Hannah felt was entirely disproportionate to the brief exchange, but before she could examine it further, Henry struck up a lively tune on his fiddle. Several couples moved to the cleared area and began to dance, their movements informal but joyful. Lucas watched for a moment, then turned to Hannah. "Would you care to dance, Miss Rose?" The return to formality, combined with the slight teasing in his tone, made Hannah smile. "I would indeed, Mr. Zephyr." He stood and offered his hand, leading her to the edge of the dancing area. "I should warn you," he said as they faced each other, "I'm not schooled in formal ballroom steps." "And I've never danced to fiddle music," Hannah admitted. "So we're evenly matched in our ignorance." Lucas's laugh was warm and genuine. "Fair enough. Shall we learn together then?" He placed one hand at her waist, took her right hand in his left, and guided her into the spirited dance. Hannah quickly discovered that what Lucas lacked in formal training, he made up for in natural grace and an innate sense of rhythm. After a few initial missteps, they found their pattern together, moving in harmony to Henry's lively playing. As the tune ended and another began, Lucas drew her slightly closer. The propriety-minded part of Hannah knew she should maintain more distance, but the rest of her thrilled at his nearness, at the strength in the arm that held her, at the way his eyes never left her face. They danced 3 songs in succession before Hannah needed a respite. Lucas led her to the edge of the gathering where lanterns had been lit against the growing darkness. The cool evening air was welcome after the exertion of dancing. "You dance well for someone without formal training," Hannah observed, slightly breathless. "And you adapt quickly for a Boston society lady," Lucas returned, his expression warm. "Would you like some punch, or perhaps a walk? The view from the ridge is worth seeing at sunset." The invitation in his eyes was unmistakable, and Hannah found herself nodding without hesitation. I'd love to see the view. Lucas offered his arm, and Hannah took it, acutely aware of the eyes that followed them as they slipped away from the main gathering. She spotted her aunt watching with a knowing expression, but was relieved when Martha merely nodded slightly, granting tacit permission for this chaperoned, but not really excursion. They walked in comfortable silence along a well-worn path that led up a gentle slope behind the Wilson homestead. The setting sun painted the landscape in vibrant oranges and golds, casting long shadows across the valley. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed as they reached the ridge. Below them, challies spread out in miniature, the lights of the town just beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Beyond, the mountains stood like ancient sentinels against the darkening sky. "It is," Lucas agreed, but when Hannah glanced at him, she found he wasn't looking at the view but at her. The intensity in his gaze made her heart race. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cooling evening air. "Hannah," Lucas began, his voice low and serious. "I know you haven't been here long, and I wouldn't presume to rush you, but I find myself thinking about you far more than I should." The honest admission touched her deeply. "I think about you too," she confessed, "more than is probably wise." Lucas took a step closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Is it unwise to think of each other?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "By Boston standards, certainly. We've known each other barely 2 weeks, but here—" She gestured to the wild landscape around them. "Here, everything seems to move at a different pace. Life and death happen quickly. Perhaps it's not so strange that other things might develop quickly too." "Other things," Lucas repeated, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Like friendship." "Yes," Hannah agreed, her own lips curving upward. "Friendship and perhaps more." The word hung between them, full of possibility. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and when she didn't, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I would like to court you properly." Hannah rose, he said quietly. "With your aunt's blessing and in full view of the community. No secrets, no shame." The declaration, so straightforward and honorable, filled Hannah with warmth. "I would like that very much, Lucas Zephyr." His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then suddenly brilliant. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to refuse, he bent his head toward hers. Their first kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a soft press of lips that nonetheless sent Hannah's heart racing. When they parted, Lucas's eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or hesitation. Finding none, he smiled again and offered his arm to escort her back to the gathering. As they walked, Hannah felt a curious mix of excitement and peace. There would be challenges ahead. She was no fool about the difficulties they might face because of Lucas's heritage, or the adjustments she would need to make to life in the West. But in that moment, with the sun setting behind them and Lucas's solid presence beside her, Hannah felt a certainty that had eluded her since her father's death. This was where she was meant to be. This was the beginning of something real and true and lasting. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Hannah's life. True to his word, Lucas courted her openly and honorably. He spoke with Martha, formally asking permission to call on Hannah, which her aunt granted with evident pleasure. Their riding lessons continued, but now they were interspersed with other activities: Sunday dinners, picnics by the creek, and visits to Lucas's ranch in the valley. Hannah's riding skills improved rapidly under his patient tutelage, and soon she was comfortable enough to ride Daisy without constant supervision. As May gave way to June, the Idaho countryside bloomed with wildflowers and vibrant greenery. Hannah fell more deeply in love with the land, with the community that had welcomed her, and most of all with Lucas Zephyr. She came to know him not just as the heroic figure who had saved her from the Stampede, but as a complex man with strengths and vulnerabilities, dreams and doubts. She learned about his struggles after his parents' deaths, how he'd fought to keep their ranch when others thought a half-breed had no right to such prime land. She came to understand his quiet dignity not as aloofness, but as hard-won self-respect in the face of prejudice. In turn, Lucas discovered Hannah's depths beyond the polite Boston exterior: her quick wit, her passion for literature, her unexpected practicality, and her fierce loyalty. He delighted in introducing her to his world, showing her the beauty of the land he loved with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a treasured secret. Not everyone in Challis approved of their courtship. Hannah occasionally noticed whispered comments when they walked together in town, and once or twice, Lucas was pointedly excluded from gatherings where she was welcomed. But the core of the community, the Wilsons, Martha, and the older settlers who had known Lucas's parents, supported them openly. One particularly memorable day in late June, Lucas took Hannah to a special place on his ranch, a secluded meadow carpeted with wildflowers, where a small creek created a natural pool before continuing down the valley. "This was my mother's favorite spot," he told her as they spread a blanket for their picnic. "She used to bring me here to teach me about the plants and animals. She said the Creator spoke more clearly here than anywhere else on our land." Hannah looked around at the sunlit meadow, the dancing butterflies, the clear water of the pool reflecting the blue sky, and understood why Lucas's mother had felt that way. There was a sense of peace and rightness here that transcended ordinary beauty. They ate the lunch Hannah had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, and fresh berries, and talked of inconsequential things, comfortable in each other's company. As they were finishing, Lucas grew quiet, a look of contemplation settling over his features. "What are you thinking?" Hannah asked, reaching out to touch his hand. Lucas turned his palm up to clasp hers. "I'm thinking about the future." "What about it?" Hannah prompted gently when he didn't continue. Lucas met her eyes directly. "I'm thinking that I love you, Hannah Rose, and that I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Though they had been courting for weeks, neither had spoken those words aloud before. Hannah's heart swelled with emotion so intense it almost hurt. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "I've loved you since you saved me from that stampede, I think." Lucas smiled at that. "Gratitude isn't the same as love." "No," Hannah agreed. "But sometimes gratitude opens the door to seeing someone clearly. And once I saw you, Lucas Zephyr, truly saw you, how could I help but love you?" He reached out to cup her cheek, his expression so tender it made her breath catch. "I want to marry you, Hannah. Build a home together, raise children, grow old watching sunsets from the porch. But I need you to be certain. Life here won't be easy. There will always be those who look down on us, on any children we might have." Hannah turned her face to press a kiss into his palm. "I've never been more certain of anything. The opinions of small-minded people mean nothing compared to what we feel for each other." Lucas's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Then, Hannah Rose, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Hannah answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." The kiss they shared then was deeper and more passionate than those that had come before it, a promise, a covenant between them that transcended words. When they finally separated, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I have something for you. It's not what you might have had in Boston, but it belonged to my mother and before her my grandmother." From the pouch, he withdrew a silver ring set with a polished blue stone that seemed to capture the color of the sky above them. "It's turquoise," Lucas explained. Sacred to my mother's people. It represents the sky and water, the essentials of life. My father gave it to my mother when they married, and now I'd like you to wear it. Hannah extended her trembling left hand, and Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. It's beautiful, she whispered, admiring how the blue stone caught the sunlight. I'll treasure it always. They returned to Martha's cabin that evening, their happiness evident in every glance and gesture. Martha took one look at them, noted the ring on Hannah's finger, and broke into a wide smile. Well, she said, embracing them both, it's about time. I was beginning to wonder if I'd need to lock you two in the root cellar to get a proposal. Her easy acceptance, the lack of surprise or concern, confirmed what Hannah had suspected. Her aunt had anticipated and approved of this outcome from the beginning. They agreed to a late August wedding, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they would have to endure an extended engagement. Martha threw herself into planning with enthusiasm, while Lucas began work on expanding his cabin to better accommodate a wife. Hannah divided her time between helping her aunt, learning more about running a household in the West, and assisting Lucas with his plans for their future home. She discovered a deep satisfaction in these practical preparations, in creating something tangible for their life together. News of their engagement spread quickly through Challies. Most reactions were positive, or at least politely neutral, but there were some undercurrents of disapproval, particularly from the Hollister family and a few others who shared their prejudices. Hannah learned to ignore the occasional whispers or pointed looks when she and Lucas were in town together. Lucas bore them with the quiet dignity she had come to admire, never letting the disapproval of others dim his joy in their future together. As the wedding date approached, however, tensions in the town began to increase. The summer had been unusually dry, and disputes over water rights between ranchers grew heated. The Hollisters, who controlled significant water access upstream from Lucas's property, began diverting more than their fair share, leaving several smaller ranchers, including Lucas, with diminished flow. It's not right, Lucas explained one evening as they walked by the creek on his property. The watercourse, usually vigorous even in summer, had dwindled to a concerning trickle. There's a long-standing agreement about water usage. Tom Hollister knows it, but his sons are pushing him to expand their herd beyond what the land can reasonably support. Hannah could hear the worry beneath his calm explanation. What happens if it continues? Lucas sighed, looking out over his meadows where the grass was beginning to brown at the edges. If we don't get rain soon, and if they don't restore the proper flow, I could lose a significant portion of my grazing land. The cattle would suffer, and I might have to sell some at a loss to prevent them starving. Surely there must be some authority who can enforce the agreement. Hannah asked, thinking of the courts and legal system she was familiar with from Boston. Lucas shook his head. Out here, water rights are complicated. There are laws, yes, but enforcement is another matter, and the Hollisters have influence with the territorial judge. He must have seen the concern in her expression, because he pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Don't worry. I'll figure something out. This isn't the first dry summer we've faced, and Henry Wilson and some of the other old-timers are on my side. They remember the agreements that were made. Despite his reassurances, Hannah couldn't help but worry. She knew how much Lucas's ranch meant to him. It was his heritage, his future, their future together. The thought of the Hollisters using their power to threaten that out of prejudice or greed made her angry in a way she'd rarely experienced. 2 weeks before their wedding, the situation came to a head. Lucas rode to town for supplies and found Tom Hollister and his sons outside the general store. The confrontation, as recounted later by witnesses, began civilly enough, Lucas inquiring about the water situation, Tom offering vague promises about checking the diversion dam. But the youngest Hollister son, James, had been drinking and took the opportunity to make comments not just about water rights, but about Lucas's heritage and his upcoming marriage to that Boston girl who didn't know her place. According to Henry Wilson, who had been nearby, Lucas maintained his composure admirably until James suggested that Hannah would come to her senses before saddling herself with half-breed children. At that point, Lucas's legendary restraint had finally broken. The fight was brief but decisive. James Hollister, despite being younger and fueled by whiskey, was no match for Lucas's controlled strength and experience. When it ended, James was nursing a broken nose and several bruises, while Lucas had only skinned knuckles to show for the encounter. Sheriff Davis had intervened before Tom Hollister could escalate matters, separating the men and sending them firmly in opposite directions with warnings about disturbing the peace. But the incident left a simmering tension in Challies that Hannah could feel when she visited town the following day. Lucas had come to Martha's cabin that evening to explain what had happened, his skinned knuckles and tight expression telling part of the story before he'd even spoken. "I'm sorry," he said after recounting the incident. "I lost my temper. It was foolish." Hannah took his injured hand gently between both of hers. "You defended my honor and our future children's. I can hardly fault you for that." "Still," Lucas sighed, "it's complicated things." Tom Hollister is even less likely to respect the water agreements now, and James has been making threats around town. Martha, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "James Hollister has always been more bluster than substance, but I agree this situation needs resolution before your wedding. The last thing we need is trouble on your special day." In the end, it was Henry Wilson who helped broker a solution. As one of the oldest and most respected settlers in the valley, he called a meeting of all the ranchers affected by the water dispute. With Sheriff Davis present to maintain order, they revisited the original agreements and established a more formal written arrangement that specified each ranch's water allotment based on acreage, historical usage, and legitimate need. Tom Hollister, faced with the united front of his neighbors and aware that his son had overstepped by making the confrontation personal, reluctantly agreed to the terms. The flow to Lucas's Creek was restored to its proper level within days. The water dispute resolved, Hannah and Lucas could turn their full attention back to their wedding preparations. The ceremony would be held at the church in Challies, with a celebration afterward at Martha's homestead, which had more room for guests than Lucas's still expanding cabin. As the day approached, Hannah found herself filled with a mix of excitement and occasional flashes of melancholy. She wished her father could be there to give her away, to see the good man she was marrying and the life she was building. Lucas, sensitive to her moods, suggested a private memorial for both their parents the day before the wedding, a quiet visit to the small cemetery where his mother and father rested, and a letter to Hannah's father that they would burn at sunset, letting the smoke carry her words to heaven. The gesture, so thoughtful and so perfectly aligned with both their heritages, reinforced Hannah's certainty that she was marrying a man of rare understanding and compassion. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if the August sun had determined to bless their union with its most golden light. Hannah dressed in Martha's cabin, wearing a gown of ivory satin that her aunt had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding dress. "You look beautiful," Martha said, fastening a pendant around Hannah's neck, a simple silver locket that had belonged to Hannah's mother. "Your parents would be so proud of the woman you've become." Hannah blinked back tears, embracing her aunt tightly. "Thank you for everything, for welcoming me here, for supporting us, for being my family." Martha returned the embrace with equal feeling. "It has been my joy to see you blossom here, to find love and purpose. And Lucas is a good man, the best kind of man. You will build a beautiful life together." A knock at the door announced Henry Wilson, who had offered to escort Hannah to the church in his wagon and to give her away in the absence of her father. "Ready, Miss Rose?" he asked, his usually gruff voice gentle as he took in her appearance. "You're a vision, my dear. That boy of yours is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Hannah replied with a smile, accepting his arm. The short journey to the church passed in a blur of anticipation. Hannah was vaguely aware of townspeople pausing to watch the wedding procession, of children running alongside the wagon, of the perfect blue sky overhead. But her thoughts were focused entirely on the man waiting for her, on the future they would begin together in just moments. The small church was filled to capacity, with every pew occupied by friends and neighbors. As Henry escorted her down the aisle, Hannah saw faces from across the valley: the Wilsons, of course, shopkeepers from town, ranchers Lucas had worked with, even a small contingent of Shoshone in traditional dress who had come to honor the son of one of their own. And then she saw Lucas, standing tall and straight beside the preacher, more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a new black suit and crisp white shirt. The look on his face as he watched her approach was one Hannah knew she would remember until her dying day: wonder and love, and a joy so pure it seemed to illuminate him from within. When Henry placed her hand in Lucas's, Hannah felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that transcended words. The preacher's voice seemed to come from a great distance as he began the ceremony, but Hannah heard Lucas's vows with perfect clarity, his deep voice steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. When it came time for Hannah to speak her own vows, she was surprised by the steadiness of her voice, the absolute certainty she felt as she pledged herself to this man before God and their community. The exchange of rings, Lucas now wearing a simple silver band that matched the setting of her turquoise, the preacher's pronouncement, and then the kiss that sealed their union, sweet, reverent, and full of promise. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Hannah saw nothing but smiling faces. Whatever divisions might exist in Challies, whatever prejudices some might harbor, on this day in this place, there was only celebration for their happiness. The wedding feast at Martha's homestead lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors. Henry's fiddle provided music for dancing, and the yard was strung with lanterns that glowed like earthbound stars as twilight descended. Lucas and Hannah moved through the celebration, accepting congratulations, sharing dances, and stealing occasional moments alone together at the edges of the gathering. As the party continued around them, Lucas took Hannah's hand and led her to the porch steps. "Mrs. Zephyr," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Are you happy?" "Completely," Hannah answered truthfully. "Are you?" Lucas nodded, his gaze so tender it made her heart ache. "More than I ever thought possible." He glanced back at the celebration, then to her again. "I think we could slip away now without anyone noticing, or at least without anyone minding." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication, but she nodded her agreement. They had decided she would move to Lucas's ranch immediately after the wedding rather than spending a last night at Martha's. Her belongings had already been transported, and Daisy was saddled and waiting alongside Samson, ready for the ride to their new home together. They made their farewells quietly, a tight hug from Martha, who whispered words of blessing in Hannah's ear. A handshake from Henry that turned into an uncharacteristic embrace. A few knowing smiles and good-natured comments from closer friends. And then they were riding away from the lights and music, toward the valley where their ranch now awaited. The night was clear, the moon full enough to light their path without lanterns. Hannah rode beside her husband, feeling a curious mixture of nervousness and absolute rightness. When they crested the final hill and the cabin came into view, Hannah caught her breath. Lucas had been working for weeks to prepare it, but she hadn't seen the finished result until now. The cabin had been expanded, with a new section added to one side. A porch wrapped around the front, furnished with 2 rocking chairs. Lanterns glowed in the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney, evidence that someone, probably Henry's wife, had come ahead to prepare for their arrival. "Welcome home, Hannah," Lucas said softly, watching her face for her reaction. "It's perfect," she replied, her voice catching on the lump in her throat. "Absolutely perfect." They dismounted, and Lucas took care of the horses while Hannah waited on the porch, taking in the view that was now hers, the moonlit valley. The creek once again flowing strong and clear, the outline of mountains against the star-strewn sky. When Lucas returned, he paused at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her with an expression of wonder. "I still can't quite believe you're really here, that you chose this life, chose me." Hannah extended her hand to him. "I can't imagine having chosen differently. This is where I belong, Lucas, with you in this place." He climbed the steps and took her hand, bringing it to his lips for a kiss that sent shivers down her spine. Then, with a swift movement that made her gasp in surprise, he swept her into his arms. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying you over the threshold," he said, his voice low and intimate in a way that made Hannah's heart race. "So I've heard," she managed, sliding her arms around his neck. He carried her across the threshold into their home, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. The interior was simple but beautiful, polished wooden floors, a stone fireplace where a fire crackled welcomingly, sturdy furniture that showed Lucas's skill with woodworking. Fresh wildflowers stood in a vase on the table, and a quilt Hannah recognized as Martha's handiwork was draped over the back of a rocking chair. "You want to see the rest?" Lucas asked, a hint of nervousness in his tone that Hannah found endearing. She nodded, and he gave her a tour of their home, the kitchen with its new cook stove, the enlarged main room, and then, with a certain shy hesitancy, the new bedroom he had added. It was a beautiful space, with a large window that would catch the morning sun, a handcrafted bed with a headboard Lucas had carved himself, and another of Martha's quilts spread atop it. A small table held a lamp and a vase with a single wildflower. On the wall hung a framed sketch, a charcoal drawing Hannah recognized as her own work, a picture of the meadow where Lucas had proposed that she had given him as an engagement gift. "This is lovely," Hannah said softly, turning to face her husband. "You've thought of everything." "I wanted it to be perfect for you," Lucas replied, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "For us." The tenderness in his touch, the love in his eyes, dissolved any nervousness Hannah might have felt about this moment. This was Lucas, her husband, the man who had saved her life and then captured her heart. Whatever came next, they would discover it together. "I love you," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "And I love you," he answered, bending to kiss her with a passion that had been carefully restrained until now. In the privacy of their home, on their wedding night, they discovered each other fully for the first time, learning together, loving together, sealing their union in the most ancient and sacred of ways. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Hannah's head resting on Lucas's chest, his arm cradling her against his side, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the grief and loss that had sent her west to the Stampede that had nearly ended her life, but instead had brought Lucas into it. From stranger to friend to love to wife, all in the space of a few short months. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Hannah smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that sometimes life takes the strangest turns. If I hadn't lost my father, I wouldn't have come west. If I hadn't wandered into that meadow at exactly the wrong moment, you wouldn't have had to rescue me. And if I hadn't been riding fence line in that particular section that afternoon, I wouldn't have seen you," Lucas added, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "So many coincidences," Hannah mused, "or perhaps not coincidences at all." "My mother would have called it destiny," Lucas said. "She believed that some souls are meant to find each other no matter what." Hannah lifted her head to look at him, barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I like that idea, that we were always meant to find each other somehow." Lucas's hand came up to cup her cheek. "I believe it. From the moment I saw you standing frozen in that field, something in me recognized you, not just as someone in danger, but as someone important, essential." The words echoed in Hannah's heart, naming what she had felt but couldn't articulate. "Yes, exactly that. As if I'd been waiting for you without knowing it." They sealed this understanding with another kiss, and then another, rediscovering the passion they had just begun to explore. As dawn approached, they finally drifted into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms in their new home at the beginning of their life together. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Hannah adapted to ranch life with a determination and resilience that sometimes surprised even her. She learned to cook on a wood stove, to garden in the Idaho soil, to preserve food for winter, to assist with calving, and the countless other tasks that made up the rhythm of ranch life. Lucas continued to build their home and their herd, expanding both thoughtfully and sustainably. His reputation as a horse trainer grew, bringing customers from increasingly far afield. Together, they weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and the occasional resurgence of prejudice from certain quarters. The Hollister family remained cool toward them, but the open hostility diminished over time, particularly after Tom Hollister suffered a stroke that left his eldest son in charge of their ranch. Edward Hollister, more pragmatic than his father or younger brother, recognized the value of cooperative relationships with neighboring ranchers and maintained the water agreements without complaint. Hannah and Lucas welcomed their first child exactly 1 year after their wedding, a son they named William Henry Zephyr, after both their fathers. Will was a strong, healthy boy with Lucas's gray eyes and Hannah's chestnut hair, a perfect blend of both their heritages. 2 years later, twin daughters joined the family, Elizabeth Martha and Sarah Louise, who arrived in a dramatic fashion during one of the worst blizzards in memory. Lucas had been forced to deliver them himself, with Hannah providing surprisingly calm instructions between contractions, as the snowdrifts made it impossible for the doctor or midwife to reach them. The twins survived and thrived, growing into curious, spirited girls who loved nothing more than following their father around the ranch, or sitting with their mother as she wrote the stories she had dreamed of creating. For Hannah had indeed found time, between ranch duties and motherhood, to pursue her writing. Her tales of frontier women, often based loosely on the real experiences of herself and her neighbors, found an audience in Eastern magazines and eventually in a collected volume published in 1885. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Lucas surprised Hannah with a special gift, a proper writing desk placed in the corner of their expanded main room, with a view of the mountains through the window and a carved inscription on the drawer. For Hannah Rose Zephyr, who found her story in the West. The day Hannah received her first printed copy of her book was also the day she told Lucas she was expecting their fourth child. The joy on his face as he absorbed both pieces of news was something she tucked away in her heart's treasury of precious memories. James Lucas Zephyr arrived in the spring of 1886, completing their family with his placid temperament and observant eyes. Like his siblings, he grew up surrounded by love, taught to take pride in both sides of his heritage, and raised with the values that had guided his parents' honesty, hard work, compassion, and courage. As the children grew, so did the ranch and the community around it. Challies expanded, Idaho achieved statehood, and the world began to change with new inventions and ideas. Through it all, Lucas and Hannah's bond remained unshakable, deepening with each challenge faced together, each joy shared, each sorrow weathered side by side. On a warm evening in the summer of 1898, 20 years after their first meeting, Lucas and Hannah sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson. Will, now a young man of 19, was attending university in Boise, following in his grandfather's academic footsteps while maintaining his father's connection to the land. The twins, 17 and full of plans, were helping inside with supper preparations. Young James, 12 and already showing Lucas's gift with horses, was in the barn completing his evening chores. "You ever wonder," Hannah asked, her hand resting comfortably in her husband's, "what would have happened if I hadn't been in that field that day? If you hadn't ridden by at that exact moment?" Lucas considered the question, his face more weathered now but still handsome, still bearing the quiet strength that had first attracted her. "Sometimes. But then I think about what my mother used to say about souls meant to find each other." Hannah smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. At 41, she was still beautiful to him, her chestnut hair now threaded with silver, her eyes still bright with the intelligence and warmth that had captured his heart all those years ago. "I think she was right," Hannah said. "We would have found each other somehow, but I'm glad it happened the way it did." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Even the stampede," Hannah laughed, "even that, it made for a good story at least." "The best story," Lucas agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders as they watched the sun sink behind the mountains. "And we're still riding it every day." As darkness settled over the valley and the first stars appeared in the vast Idaho sky, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her here from grief-stricken Boston girl to confident Western woman, wife, mother, and author. The path had not always been easy, but it had been rich beyond anything she could have imagined when she first stepped off the train in this territory. Lucas had been right that day by the creek, when he'd observed that she was living the kind of adventure story she had dreamed of writing. But what he couldn't have known then, what neither of them could have foreseen, was that their story would be greater and more beautiful than any fiction could capture. A love built on courage and respect, tested by hardship, and made stronger for the challenges they had faced together. As they rose to go inside, to join their children for the evening meal in the home they had built with their own hands, Hannah felt the same certainty she had experienced on their wedding day, the same rightness that had filled her when Lucas pulled her up behind his saddle all those years ago. This was where she belonged. This was her place, her people, her life. And it had all begun in a moment of terror and rescue, with a stampede, a brave cowboy, and a woman who found the courage to embrace the unexpected turn her life had taken. In the warmth of their home, surrounded by the family they had created together, Hannah and Lucas Zephyr continued writing their story one day, one season, 1 year at a time. And if anyone in Challies still remembered the circumstances of their meeting, It was only as the perfect beginning to one of the greatest love stories the Idaho Territory had ever known.